We are most fortunate to have here today experienced HR executives, Lorette Makubele, HR People and Culture Director from JTI International for South, East and Central Africa.
Hi everyone.
Angela Madladla, Director of Talent Management for Ogilvy and Mather, South Africa. And Marge Manchi, Head of Human Resources, Alexander Forbes Investments. Welcome. We're really privileged to have you with us here today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here again.
Nice to be here.
So, what is culture really? What is it and why is it so important?
So, just from my perspective, culture is really the smell of an environment. So when you walk into the environment, what is your feeling? What is your experience? Because you have an experience whether or not you are interacting with individuals vocally or non-verbally. You have an experience and a feel of an environment. And that's really what culture talks to in a given space.
I think she's put it very well. You know, I think the old definition is the way we do things around here, which really is. But, you know, to Marge's point, it's the everyday experiences of your employees. You know, it's from the minute they arrive, you know, the smile on the receptionist's face, the feeling that you get, even in the building itself, you know, because then you also get to appreciate and respect that everything is alive and it's got its own energy. So it's the energy that the whole work environment actually gives you. But it's most importantly the experiences of our employees on a daily, hourly basis.
Yeah.
And have you ever been in a situation where you felt that there's a need to change something in the culture of your organization? And when that happens, how do you affect that?
Oh, I can start with that. So I've been with my employer now for just over 2 years. And when I arrived, it just felt very wrong for many reasons. But changing a culture is something, first of all, you need to have a good idea of what you're trying to do, and you need to have support from especially the top guys, because some decisions, some very difficult decisions, will need to be made along the way. So how I approached it, I approached a consultant that I'd worked with before, and we ran a culture survey. And I didn't want it to be anything that Lorette says. I wanted to say, here is what our employees are saying.
That's what you are saying.
Yeah, exactly. So once the survey was done, we then also ran some focus group sessions just to get some more meat from what the survey came out with. And then we presented it. The heads of the company had, all the way from head office in Geneva, they had to know what we're trying to do and what the survey said and what we need to do. Parts of it also resulted in us letting go of some very senior people, because as we know, a fish rots from the head. So that's why I'm saying you have to be willing to do what needs to be done, but also know that you've got the support, because if you don't have the support, your mission is going to fail, because then you'll be sabotaged along the way. You yourself are going to be attacked so many times along the way. You have to hold fast and know what you're trying to do and focus on it. And some days will be good, some days will be bad. And also because changing a culture is not an overnight thing.
No.
It's not even a yearly change that you're going to feel. It's little bits of things that are going to start taking effect. So it's a marathon that you need to be focus on the goal. And yes, sometimes the goal will change because people change and everyone kind of brings in a nuance, but the overall impact of how you're trying to, the feeling, the essence, you need to focus on it and keep on going.
So if culture is a shared way of doing things, what is it that we would like people to do in our organizations? What do you think is important?
So I believe that our strategy is our mandate regarding how the culture needs to be curated. I believe that culture is the
probably the most powerful enabler of delivering your business strategy. So if on reflection of the question that you just asked around shifting culture, I think as HR professionals, our core mandate is to be the diagnosticians of culture and the extent to which culture is actually enabling the strategy. So in terms of how does one shift, I think we regularly need to diagnose culture, and I think we use a number of levers throughout the year to do so. I think that the changes one needs to make, I challenge the notion of let's change culture. I think I think one needs to consider what aspects of culture, of this culture, need to be adjusted, amended, turned on its head in order to enable the strategy. And there are various means of doing that, to your question. So I think every HR professional has their own preference in terms of tools and capabilities. I believe in the power of the performance management system. And I believe that the behaviors that you reward will drive particular behaviors in the organization, and the behaviors that you challenge through punitive measures will shift behaviors that you want to see less of in the organization.
And of course, leading by example, like you said, the fish rots from the head.
Yeah,
so Marge, what do you
important.
do if you've got executives
Yeah.
who don't stick to culture?
Yeah.
What do you do then?
I think it's so fundamental, saying the fish does rot from the head, and it's fundamental that the situation is managed accordingly at that high level. Because remember, we're saying culture is about what employees experience, or even our internal versus our external clients, because sometimes we put a front for our external clients and don't demonstrate same behaviors and experiences internally. So essentially it's very critical internally that if you want to effect the change successfully, that you have to hold even the most senior individual accountable for not behaving according to the desired behaviors that you want to see, according to the very experience that you're saying each employee in the organization should be privy of experiencing that behavior. So holding senior members accountable for demonstrating those behaviors, which will then affect the way we do things and our culture and how employees experience the work environment, is very critical to the success of whatever survey you may decide to run. Because in the absence of people seeing this senior person behaving accordingly, they're not necessarily going to be vested in the process and not going to be vested in the very act of trying to alter and adapt whatever needs to be changed from a culture point of view.
Marge, you touch on such a valuable point. And I think it's about values and authenticity. It's very much the same thing. I'm sure a lot of people in the room have kids. You can't be one person at work and another person at home.
Right.
You can't be one person in leadership and expect the people in the organization to behave differently. Mm-hmm. It's really important that it's absolutely consistent.
Yeah.
I've heard someone say that culture is a result not of those you hire, but of those you fire. What do you think about that?
I don't agree with that statement, though.
It's quite a bold statement.
It's indicative of the people you fire. You are definitely sending a statement that this is not allowed. This is not who we are, and this is not our way. But culture is more indicative of the people who stay. And more so also, so people on the spotlight are normally your high performers, right? But that's a small percentage of your population. It's people who are so it's people who are kind of like they're subliminally manipulating things sometimes, and I'm talking about toxic culture now. The gossipers in the office and those who just sabotage every efforts that people make, but also doing it behind the scenes that you don't know. But I think ultimate belief though is that culture is just a combination of each and every individual's behavior, but it also the things that then employees see that are being rewarded, acknowledged, and when they see certain people flourishing, then people want to emulate that.
Yeah.
So make sure then that you are rewarding the right behaviors, and everything you're doing then is deliberate. Whether you are firing the people, then send the right message. And I know as HR people, it's very difficult to then tell your employees why you fired that particular individual, but also then highlight the good things, So I like the saying that catch people doing the right things and celebrate those.
I really like that. I think it's so important. Absolutely sets the example.
Absolutely. So I tend to agree with what you're saying. I think that real expressions of culture are found in the groups of people we hire, the behaviors and the misconduct that we fire, to your point, the collectives of people that get promoted. I believe most of our organizations have reward ceremonies of some form or fashion. For me, that's probably one of the most hyped experience of cultural behaviors in an organization that are being celebrated. So to the point that's just been made, I think it's a culmination of that. Promotions and the people who you promote, big enabler or story to your business around the behaviors that will be recognized and celebrated and enhanced and advanced in your business.
I want to add to what you said, because I used to work for a very good insurance company a few years ago. And one of the lessons from that was we celebrated, so the huge events were great and they created a vibe and whatever. But our CEO then challenged us and said, guys, what about the everyday experiences?
Yeah.
What about developing your managers so that they know what they're supposed to be doing? They are managing performance on a daily basis. They are coaching their people, and it does not feel like it needs to be an event that's waited on.
Yeah.
It's an everyday experience. So look at everything. Your canteen, what are they selling? How are your people experiencing it? Your pause areas, your office, your working spaces. What do they say about you? What again, sorry for the repeat, feeling are you giving your people as they walk into the office?
Absolutely.
I
It should be a way of life. It should be a way of doing things.
So I'm just jumping in because the energy is
Go for it.
under with feedback on the point that Lorette is making. And I think it's so critical, the everyday successes and the quick wins and, recommending, even, acknowledging the people that are doing small things but that go a very, very long way. Because what we tend to do as HR professionals, somehow the balance is skewed towards looking at more the reprimanding of the individuals that are not displaying the particular behaviors. So much so that we then kind of defer this focus and then don't get to focus on actually celebrating these very quick wins, these individuals that are actually exemplary and the behaviors that we actually want to see. So it's always such a challenge for us that we acknowledge and we observe, and we also step in to say, the balance has to be correct. We, as much as we need to be holding individuals accountable, we also need to make sure that there is enough of that energy being gested in celebrating individuals.
Right.
Definitely. And when you're dealing with your CEO and your CFO, and they look at things like, what does this cost and how do you measure it, and what do you think the most optimal way of dealing with that would be?
I think for sins maybe of my past life, in organizations I've worked in, CEOs are typically chartered accountants, so come from a very strong financial background. So I'm sure a lot of you can relate and know exactly where I'm heading with that comment. So bottom line is like, you want to have this conversation with me, let's see how this conversation is going to positively impact the bottom line. So that's you going into this strategic conversation with the strategic leader. And I tend to find the way to kind of, again, it also challenges us as HR professionals that we are cognizant of revenue, we are cognizant of bottom line, so we can have a seat at the table, because that's how we actually earn our seat at the table. So if we're talking fluffy stuff, which is important to us because that's our trade, right?
Yeah.
Correct? It is important to us, the fluffy stuff. We do have to look after the people. I'm not diminishing our roles in that sense, but I am saying we do also need to be in a position where we can talk through numbers and we understand the numbers, very critical, because that's how you easily get a seat at the table. But more so, the point I'm really trying to make here is, once you understand the numbers, you can also translate them into initiatives that we as HR professionals kind of embark on and present back to our leadership, who need to make decisions financially, who need to actually ingest financing into those initiatives. And the best way to do it is to show them, without the people, if you lose people, what is the rand value. So you almost have to take an initiative and orchestrate a rand value to it, and you'll see how the conversation in the room completely changes in the boardroom, because now you're talking numbers, even though we are actually talking the fluffy stuff.
Yeah, Maj is completely right, because also what we once did is, again, looking at retention. And I may be wrong here, but I think the numbers then was, for every person who leaves the company, it costs 1.5 times their salary to replace them and get a new seat on the bum who is just equally productive. So we then also ran analysis on retention. We looked at our push and pull factors, but also then retention became a target focus. We had targets to reduce attrition in our company, but also looking at, again, our hypos, our non-performers. So non-performers, guys, please do manage your non-performers. They are not there for so many reasons besides just not performing, but those who are just a zero fit to your organization and to the role and nothing can be done for them, please don't hold on to them.
There's a better place for them elsewhere.
I think just to add to what's been said, I think I sit back and I wonder whether there is room for CEOs and CFOs that actually don't appreciate the value of their talent and energize, motivated, optimized talent in a business. And I think that's a bigger question. We're fortunate in our business where we're a people business. We sell our people's ideas. I work in Ogilvy. And we're fortunate that the partnership between the finance and talent HR department is quite significant. So you have an opportunity to influence it's an influence game, really. And you're only able to get into that space, to Marge's point, if you are able to have a commercial conversation. If you and we are able to understand top line revenue versus cost factors, how people play in terms of those finance games. So I think it's a matter of taking a step back and understanding what level of influence one has to try and shift those particular dynamics.
I think what in essence we're saying from a culture's perspective, culture eats strategy any day. So if you don't have the people, who is actually going to execute on that strategy?
I want to ask another controversial question. Forgive me on this one too, Lorette. So what do you say to people who talk about HR as the steward of culture?
As the
steward of culture, as the ultimately responsible person for culture?
Well,
I'm
my
not
favorite question.
I'm not
My
responsible
favorite.
for culture.
We're very, very clear on that.
HR is not responsible
We
for
are
culture.
collectively
Exactly.
responsible for culture. Leaders are responsible for executing desired behaviors that make up culture, but we are the diagnosticians of it. That essentially is our role, to be able to hold up the mirror around what's playing out.
I think it's also important that we, and I hear where the comment could have been thrown about, and it's probably a business leader who said that, because HR, you deal with it, and it's actually a business problem, it's not an HR problem, because as HR, I'm also an employee of this organization, so I also need to have that experience. So if I can't have that experience, how do I enable you to be able to cultivate an environment of a culture that you desire to have, and a culture and an experience that you want other employees to have. So it's also very, very critical. So I can see where that comment came from, and it definitely came from a business leader who's saying, you fix it, and then let me know when it's fixed.
No,
and that's not how it works.
Exactly. So I had to raise it because it's such a pertinent thing. It's like sending your kids to school and saying, well, the teachers could sort out their values.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. You know, there's certain things that need to be done from a senior level and by setting the example. Awesome. I love the points you've made. I'm very keen to hear if there's some questions from the audience. Questions from the audience? Anybody to our panel? Could I? There we go. Have we got a mic for the gentleman, please? Your question's going to be next.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I think the lady,
Lorette.
Lawrence, sorry, I forgot your name. You spoke about the fact that the rot in the organization begins at the head. And at some point when you're doing the culture survey, you had to let go of some of the senior people. I just want to know what is it exactly that you saw in this executive that made you realize that they are deterring the organization in terms of the desired culture? Because I'll tell you what, in most of the instances it's very difficult.
Please speak up.
I'm saying in most of the instances it's very difficult because the way corporates are designed is that those at the top are the ones who hold others accountable. So it's always very difficult to hold those at the top accountable. So I just want to know, in your case, how did you do and what exactly is that said, this one is a rot and they need, and you ended up convincing the CEO and the board to say these people must go. Thank you.
So the dynamics in my organization were that the previous EXCO were in the organization for most of them over 15 years. And it was Afrikaans male, and everything controlled at the top. But in a way that then, what I didn't like was the exclusivity and the control and the centralized decision making. So if I walk into an executive room and people then address me in Afrikaans, then I know I've got a problem. Then if I walk into a room and people are then saying, no, but me, HR person, you can't talk to my people without letting me know, then I was like, what do you think I've been hired to do? So then it became, what if you want to make the decisions? We've got a staff complement and we've got management, and you want to make all the decisions in the organization, even at a team leader level, then what are they supposed to do? I then went to my CEO and I asked him, okay, you've been here 2 years. So luckily for me, he is an expatriate from Canada. So he doesn't really understand some of the nuances. He knew he was uncomfortable about something, but he didn't really know if it's normal in South Africa or how to go about it. So when I said to him, listen, these things are making me uncomfortable. And I can say so wholeheartedly because one, I've come from some great organizations where the culture was open for everyone. And secondly, and luckily for me, I am in that position where I can make this decision. I can say to my EXCOM and the regional president that this is not right. And it's not right for these reasons. But why I then went for a survey, and I'm not advertising here, but we used the Barrett survey. For me, it's because it's easy. It only asks 3 questions. What are your individual values as a person? What values do you think are happening here in the organization? And what do you want them to be? And that's it. And we then pre-selected or limited the number of values that can be picked, 50 in each category, and then we then sent out the survey.
Can I just add onto that experience? It is difficult to hold executives accountable when the behavior is not desired in as far as how they're behaving. And I've often found, just to add to your point, my peers, because it is a very difficult conversation to have, and I can see where the gentleman is coming from. But I've also found success in actually enabling a discussion with the very friends, because everybody knows the rotten fish in the organization. We know of the individuals, we know the culprits, we have corridor conversations about the culprits. So even the executive team is very aware that that individual or those individuals are really not doing a service to the culture and the experience that we want employees to have. So why not use the very same friends, the very same co-EXCO members to hold that individual accountable? And I've personally had success in running that conversation. Why? Because individuals often, it's not because they don't know, they see it's happening, but they're not equipped and enabled to have that that courageous, hard conversation with their peer. So when you do it peer to peer, it seems less intimidating and more collegial. So I tend to find you'll probably get better traction running it that way.
If I may close my comment, thanks much for reminding me. So, and I am saying this because I'm also like a very big advocate for diversity. So when I mentioned the Afrikaans thing, it was not that I'm now bashing on Afrikaans people, please don't get me wrong. There was one particular bully out of the whole group. And once we got rid of that one person, everyone else in our team then felt free to actually speak out, to actually now finally have a voice, then say, yeah, but okay, we were never really comfortable with all of that, whatever. So it's not about any race or culture, because anyone can really be toxic in your executive team. It's about identifying what the toxicity is and what the behaviors that you don't want to associate yourselves are.
And dealing with it directly, as you said.
Yeah.
Deal with it directly, address it, discuss it as peers, because you know that's often a very good way to make a bully disappear. To say, well, this is not acceptable, this is just not the way we do things, or this is how I feel.
You'd be surprised most times individuals, because they've been doing it for so long, they're actually not aware they're doing it. And the moment you put up the mirror, it's like, well, someone should have told me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is. It is. It's often the case, because I really think there are very few people out there that are intentionally malicious or horrible. You know, people fall into terrible ways of doing things, and if it's not pointed out, you know, it's very hard to change or to correct. And like you say, you have to. Once you change the dynamics in the team and the wrong person's out, it really opens up things dramatically. The lady at the front, you also had a question? Can we have a mic here, please?
Thank you. I've been contemplating how I'm going to ask this question, so if it comes out wrong, please forgive me.
Don't worry.
I would love to actually ask an open question to all of you in terms of what your learnings has been in influencing key leaders, because at times, especially in huge corporates, you do get technically executively strong people, and they are there for those reasons, but they don't give the buy-in, they don't like the soft and fluffy. So impacting those level of leadership from an HR point of view, especially from a consultative point of view, is not always easy. And if you step on toes, you are stepping on toes.
Yeah.
It's a great question. It's a good question. You want me to start? Or you
Okay.
want to start, Clarice?
You know, talking to peers, it's so much easier than talking as an HRBP to a senior person who undermines you. So, but for you to gain their respect, you have to try to build that conversation. But don't ever feel like you have to do it on your own. There's something called corporate politics that we all need to be aware of. Learn the game, play the game. Don't ever come in with a naive view of feeling like, you know what, my work will speak for itself. Your work will speak for itself, but also how you maneuver yourself around the relationships is important. Get yourself a sponsor. Make sure your own HR lead supports you. And if you need them to back you up, ask for that backup. You know, walk into your CEO's office. If they say we've got an open door policy, test it. You know, and walk into them and say, no, I would like to do this. This is the idea I had. I'm finding my challenge is this. How would you advise me to approach so and so?
Lorette, that is so valuable, because it's very hard for someone, if you ask them for help, to turn you away. And even the most senior and difficult executives, they're just people, right?
They're just people.
They're just people. And if you can get to the heart, put yourself in their shoes, or think about what's important to them, and have that kind of a conversation, it really makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, I think it's also important, just to that question, yes, we do hire specialists, and because they're so fantastic at what they do, and then we bombard them with teams of people, then they don't really know what to do with the teams. They just want to do the work. They want to be technical, they want to be specialists, and now you've given them 20 people to now have to manage. Now, what is this? And I think often, perhaps where we may slightly fall short in my experience is where you're in that situation as an HR professional and you're not in position to enable this line manager, this specialist who wants to purely do the technical work. You're not in a position, you're out of position essentially in as far as not enabling him or her to have those softer conversations with individuals. So, for example, you're saying it's time for performance review, the system is up, please proceed with review. So you're not equipping them on how to have this conversation because they're not necessarily fussed about the system. They'll figure it out, they're technical or they're specialists, but it's more around, so what am I supposed to do when I'm having this conversation? Are there things I can say, things I can't say? So it's just making sure that as the HR professional, you're in position to enable and equip this individual to be comfortable enough to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And it's also as simple as saying, I know you probably haven't done this a lot. I'm happy to sit with you and guide you through until you're comfortable, then I'm going to leave you on your own. Then they're happy. And they're also happy that they can also focus on the technical stuff as well, but they know you're there to partner with them as the HRBP.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think my only addition is to nurture the key relationships that you care for and you've got to oversee. And I think that's a longer term to a medium term game, and it's a very strategic and tactical decision to invest in those relationships, not only when things are going wrong, but along the journey. So even though there's no problem in Department X, I'm going to have a relationship with this manager and just have regular catch-ups. So when something isn't optimal, I at least have a basis to go and have a conversation off a sound relationship. You get me, I get you, you know I'm interested and I've got your interest at heart. So landing tough news makes it a lot easier when there's a basis of a relationship there.
Managing the emotional bank account.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. More questions from the audience. Yes.
Good morning.
Morning.
I just have a quick question. Actually, it's more of asking for advice. Now, towards HR professionals within the HR departments themselves, what would you advise regarding HR professionals observing that the processes within the HR department itself is somewhat biased to the HR personnel within the HR department, and how to go on about addressing such matters?
Can you repeat your question again?
Advice regarding HR processes that are not particularly
Perhaps give us an example, if you could think of an example
For an
of how...
example, I had a colleague who was advised by the supervisor to apply for a position. However, somebody was already in process of being promoted. So there were many instances, but in hindsight, I would like to know, get advice from you on how to approach such instances where the HR processes become
See, that's not an HR. It's
biased towards the HR personnel within the HR departments themselves.
That's not a process issue.
Yeah.
That's a person issue.
Credibility.
That's someone who gave someone the wrong advice or who did not have the guts to just say the role has already been filled or someone has already been identified. So sometimes we do have HR processes that may not serve a purpose. Let's say, like in my organization, we do advertise every position. But it does happen that at some point, especially for specialist roles or key roles, you know who has already been identified, who has already been on, what do we call it?
Earmarked or...
On the track, to be filled. So it's balancing the act of being honest and having courageous conversations when you have to. But we know sometimes if I didn't advertise this role and I went and appointed this person, someone else somewhere is going to complain that we never even got an opportunity. So it's a balancing act. But from your example that you just made, for me, I think my bigger problem is the HR person who advised another to go advertise a role, because then to go apply for a role, because what that left you with is a feeling of being hard done by, being misled. And so we can't hide behind processes because of behavior.
It's a problematic action and it should be dealt with accordingly.
So what would you advise in terms of an HR person within an HR department observing that the process within HR itself is being compromised in quite a lot of times?
I think it's important that you are in HR, you're an HR person. So my personal advice would be, whenever I'm in situations, maybe perhaps a similar situation as you're in, being an HR professional, I always ask myself, how would I advise business? Because it seems very interesting. We can't self-diagnose and treat ourselves, and we also display certain ills that happen in other departments. But as soon as it's removed from you personally and you're advising a line manager, you will probably sit with the best answer. It's not going to come from the panelists sitting here, just because now you have to advise another department. But as soon as it's internal, there seems to be, some form of block. But I also understand, because you're emotionally vested to those group of individuals, and that's probably why that happens. My personal advice would be, you need to engage on it, because it is top of mind. You're raising it here. So go back, assemble the team, and engage on, do like a post-mortem debrief. This is what happened, this is the situation. How could we have better managed the situation? So I think it's best to have a conversation around what was done, what was said, and the impact of obviously the action.
But Marge, I think one of the problems she's highlighting is that in most organizations, the HR team does not have an HR person who looks after them.
Yeah.
And that's where we all fall short. Because then who do you go to?
Yeah.
I think that's one of your bigger problems, yes. But the person you go to is the head of HR. There's no one else. And when you walk into, when you walk into my office as an HR person, my first responsibility is you. To, first of all, respect your feelings, hear you out and understand your problem, exactly where you're coming from. And then if it's happening in my department, I have to address it.
And to build on what Lorette is saying, I believe that it's important to always try and come up with a suggested solution. Whenever you ask a question, think, if I was the CEO or if I was whoever, what would I do and what would the right person be? And approach the person and say, I've observed this, and like you said, this is not okay, and it is someone that's going to help you, but try and come up with a suggested solution and say, well, why don't we address it the following way? Or how about this? Which allows for someone to say, brilliant idea, go ahead, or hang on, in addition to the following. And it's a great opportunity to learn and to grow. Yeah. And if your culture is right, you should be able to have those conversations every day.
One more point, sorry.
Yeah.
One thing I also always advocate is, if you've got an issue or concern with someone, try raising it with them first.
Yes.
Because if you come to my office, you are seen to be escalating an issue. But if you have never tried to address it before, then you are also being seen to be backbiting.
And that is so true. If you think that you should be treat people the way you would like to be treated. So if someone has a problem with you, you would want them to tell you and not a third party. And there's no problem that a third party can solve that's not better solved between two individuals, beyond a shadow of a doubt.
100%.
A final question. Anybody in the audience?
At the back.
Front. Was there another one at the back?
The lady at the back, yes.
At the back.
She put her hand up first.
Hello, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to say thanks on the point about knowing corporate politics and knowing how to navigate that. That's something I needed to hear. And in relationships. But on the culture part, what I wanted to ask is, how do we extend culture to remote stuff? because they often feel left out because they're not there to feel and experience everything else that we're experiencing. And for us to be able to, for them or everyone else to be able to deliver on the strategy, they need to feel included. And you find that when you have your functions, they are there and everyone else who's in the office is there because they're not feeling that feeling. So how do we then extend the corporate culture to everyone else who's not in
Good
the
question.
feeling zone?
I hope I've understood your question correctly. Does the remote staff also relate to perhaps if people are sitting in various regions?
In the regions and also maybe in our organization, people who are in sales or always on the road who come in the office once to do admin or whatever.
Yeah. I think just from experience, I'm thinking of the industries I've worked in and been in situations where it's regional, it crosses borders as well. How do you then kind of, inculcate a consistent culture across multiple offices and multiple jurisdictions? I think the important takeaway for me in my experience has always been trying to find those avenues of engagement. So when, for example, you're doing like a reward and recognition evening, particularly the sales guys, who's the top salesperson, for example, and making sure that it's an organizational effort. It's not just limited to the small team, because then they'll never ever kind of have an opportunity to engage and interact with other individuals that are perhaps not in the sales team. So I think it's important to also extend the invitation and also to paint the picture that you're extending the invitation because you're also facilitating that they're integrated more widely and broadly into the organization. Yeah. And I think creating spaces and opportunities of that level of engagement will certainly also help people feel vested in the rest of the organization and not only limited to a particular team.
Yeah. I think just to add on to what Marge just said, I think pay special attention to your internal comm strategy. We live in an awesome age of mobile and video connection, and I think try to leverage those channels to create the engagement and the connection. I think we as HR professionals, I've only in the past 7 years appreciated it more, is the role and the importance of marketing and our partnership with marketing to engage our staff. So take that strategy and that internal comms engagement strategy quite seriously and pull the right support, the people into that to make it work for you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Engage, 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 and when in doubt, ask.